fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds. We are back. We're at episode 150-something now, if you can believe it. And back by popular demand, Chris Bush, a.k.a. the Speckled Truth. Dude, good to have you back on the show.
Hey, thanks, Joe. I really appreciate it, buddy. I really do. I don't know about the popular demand stuff, though, man. We're just trying to continue grinding and just doing what we're doing, you know? So thank you.
Yeah, it was the first time we had you on, we talked all about gator trout, and it was definitely one of the most downloaded episodes we have had. And I know since then you've started your own podcast, which I listened to the first couple episodes, and awesome. And it's with the Speckled Truth on iTunes.
Yeah, the Speckled Truth podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Podbean, I think is the other one. But yeah, it's been a really fun endeavor. You've inspired me to kind of pursue that a little bit, man. And I think it's been pretty unique. Yeah, with regards to getting the ability to really talk to some pretty established folks in terms of the big trout area in not only Texas, but really across the various estuaries from North Carolina to Texas. Now, as we've just started, we're in Texas now, and we're obviously slowly starting to migrate to Florida and up the East Coast with our guests. But yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, I'm proud of you, man. That's it's so cool. And if you guys have not listened to his podcast or did not hear the first episode we did with Chris, he is the founder of Speckled Truth. And this dude, I would like to think, has probably more intel and more like science-based and data and like trends on big trout from Texas, basically up to Virginia, than anyone I personally know. And some of the things that you shared last time were just like, wow. And so with this particular episode, we're going to call it TOD. Trout on demand in the fall. And I had sent you a text, I guess was it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. And I was like, man, how was the bite this weekend? And you sent me some pictures back before you replied. And I was like, okay, I have seen all I need to see. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, it's fall, it's winter, right? And so I'm sitting in my truck, recording this podcast with you, wishing I was fishing because it's the absolute perfect conditions that I love to fish in. I think the average angler would probably be considered miserable, but I see just amazing. It's misty. It's 57 degrees. Wind's blowing a little bit, but it's super gray sky, misty, like I said, and pretty chilly. And those are my absolute favorite conditions. And I am definitely excited to obviously film, but I will say I do wish I was fishing as well too. But yeah, it's been good. It's fall, winter. It's getting cranked up and excited. You know, and the pattern's starting to develop a little bit. Starting to kind of figure those fish out, kind of what's going on, and having a few of those fronts move through. And that's big. That's big not only for the big fish, but certainly here in this area.
So you've been documenting these, what do you call them? The 30-inch citations. Is that right?
So both, right? So I think since we've spoken last time, we just started it, was the trophy trout citation. That's for each state. Okay. And that's for 27 up to 30-inch fish, because we feel the value of those, let's say a 27 and a half or a 28-inch trout in Mississippi, is a pretty, from an angling perspective, pretty monumental occasion. And so that is kind of what we would equate to like a 30 here in Texas. And so there's a valid data point for a fish that size in that particular estuary. So we've created kind of these two-tiered citation programs. And so that's what we call a state citation program, where we'll mail you a state kind of cutout that was designed citation for that accomplishment. And then we have obviously the Dirty 30s, which we mail out the boxes of tackle and stuff, and obviously the Dirty 30 sticker as well. And so we've captured all that. I shared a little bit actually on the Speckled Truth Facebook page, because we've run some of the data, and it's easiest to really kind of look at Texas because the majority of the actual citations have come from the Texas fishery. And so when you look at trophy trout citations, 27 inch to 30, and in dirty 30s or 30-inch fish and above, you really have a really large group over the course of 1 year. And so what we did is we took some of that data, we kind of ran it and wanted to see if there were any sort of like trends popping up. And we actually saw some really cool ones, man. One was definitely related to, and I remember talking to you about it, which was fish lure by location and time of year, lure by location and time of year. And in one of the graphs, you can definitely see a trend of, especially in the middle coast, which we'll call East Matagorda Bay and a Baffin complex. So upper Laguna Madre would be Baffin, middle coast would be East Matagorda Bay, upper coast is like Galveston, and then lower Laguna Madre is like Mansfield. Anyway, middle coast and upper Laguna Madre, so Baffin and East Matagorda Bay, we're seeing, especially in the wintertime, fish starting to eat bigger profile baits, corky fat boys, bigger soft plastics, top water, even big top waters like super spooks. And that is a trend that only has an uptick in the winter, and then it goes back down in the spring. What we've also found that is soft plastics, regardless of time of year, are the most consistent. And I can't remember them completely offhand, but it would be like if you were looking at upper coast, middle coast, upper Laguna Madre, really those numbers would typically be the highest across each of those four areas. And then, like I said, you could see kind of the uptick with the higher or bigger profile plastics, especially in the wintertime. The last thing is I've written about this before, and I'm not trying to create a narrative by any stretch of the imagination, but I think what we're trying to do is get after a little bit of, hey, maybe some bait action or bait action. And so one of the things is we looked at soft plastic by lure maker for all the soft plastic citations that were submitted. And so we broke out all the soft plastics, and what we found is that if across would be fall, winter, spring, and summer, you see like down south lure, which is a very popular soft plastic here in the state of Texas. It's made by Mike Bossy here. Actually, he used to live in Austin. I think he lives in Baytown now, out of Houston. But it's a very used plastic, and that's why I love using Texas, because you're starting to see and get a ton of the information from various anglers across the coast. And so what we see is in the fall, we see a high percentage caught on down south lure. In the spring and summer, it's almost the same in terms of amount of fish registered or caught and registered on that tail. But what we see is that in the wintertime, there is a huge well, regardless of soft plastics, your K-wigglers, your down south lures, which are similar in profile. And what that tells me is that either anglers have chosen to throw something like a corky fat boy. So they've made the conscious decision to throw something different, or the fish are telling them, hey, I don't want a soft plastic. I don't want anything that has a boot tail or a paddle tail or anything like that. I want something that is very, just almost like a darter profile or something smaller in profile, or not even a soft plastic in general. And so I think that's where we're seeing the correlation is we're seeing a well in soft plastics and an uptick in your bigger profile baits like 27 MRs or your Mirrodine XLs, or again, your top waters and your corky fat boys. So these are just little things that we're looking and trying to get and see if there is any trends associated with, again, angler preference, or not only that, if the fish are telling us something. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded, but we're pretty nerdy about all this.
And I know you're more of an artificial lure guy, but you guys are tracking, if it's live bait, obviously you're tracking all that stuff, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so believe it or not, we have you start to see live bait and bait in general start to kind of take precedence a little bit. I say precedence, but we start to just see more citations registered via either of those two, either cut bait or, again, live croaker or shrimp or whatever it is, in the spring, summertime. So that, again, that could tell us, again, that kind of an angling cognizant, choice to then throw it because it's available, or if we're having guides, with some more inexperienced clientele, it's just obviously it makes it, or again, we could see, the fish saying, hey, there's a lot of bait present in the fishery. And so I don't want your garbage soft plastic that is totally fake, and we want the real deal, And so it's just, all those things could be said, but the short of it is we still have a pretty immature data set, and we're trying to grow it year after year and see if those trends hold across the years. And then now we can start to make maybe some generalizations and some maybe more definitive things. But we track all that stuff. But I do want to leave one thing with regards to the data set, and I think it's pretty awesome in a story that we tell. And obviously, we're very conservation minded, and that is across the various citations, we had about a 78% release rate for all of our dirty 30s, which means out of all the fish that were registered, which were close to, I think there was 93, 78% of those fish went back. Across the state citations, out of all of those fish, which was over 220, 83 or like 84% if you round up, all those fish are released. So maybe we're starting to see a little bit of a trend there too, where, folks that pursue those bigger fish maybe just have an appreciation for them and release them back to go hopefully be caught by somebody else, or at least obviously contribute back to the fishery through spawning and genetics and all that stuff. So that's a good news story that we definitely want to tell.
Heck yeah, I love that, dude.
Yes,
so
sir.
When I sent you a text yesterday, you had mentioned, and I saw a picture of looked like a jerkbait, and then you had also said that conditions changed and you had to change with it. So you mind sharing? Because I think that's, I don't know the whole story yet, but I think what you just went through is probably a trend that people could use anywhere, because it is kind of that fall. It's just a weird time where all of a sudden cold front comes through and the next day it's hot again. So what happened?
Yeah. So leading up to the day, right? And so I'm pretty I like to fish on a whim, and I get some folks pretty upset that, typically like to fish with me because I can't really schedule a day. Like I'm not going to say, hey, I'm going to go on Sunday. Instead, I'm like, okay, what's the weather doing? I keep a really close eye on it. And if I have a weather window and a time window, I'm going to make that trip. And so I was really eyeing this front that we just recently had passed. It was around a new moon. And so what I saw on Friday was it looked like Sunday and Monday were going to shape up to be the days to go. We're obviously one day post new moon and then Monday post or 2 days after. But what I saw is actually the day of the new moon on Saturday. When I woke up, it was already a day post front. And so now we're starting to see the pressure change, and we had a hard northeast wind. And then basically that afternoon, it was going to give way to really no wind. And so those who fish kind of the Laguna Madre or here in the Texas coast, what you find is that in those areas where there's not a whole lot of tidal influence, you have to have some wind to push some water around and kind of get that. So if you're around a big moon phase and you get some water kind of moving, you can have a really, really epic bite. So when I went and saw that weather window of that wind starting to lay down, so that still told me that there was still going to be some water movement, but that pressure is now settling. So it's not, we don't have a high rising pressure. Now I can make the decision, hey, I'm going to maybe capitalize on this late evening minor to go and target some fish with some water movement around a really, really good moon phase. And so that's what I did. I decided to go on Saturday afternoon and fish Saturday afternoon and Sunday. And when I got out there, basically it was as forecasted, thankfully. Real sunny sky, which again is not my most favorite, but again, we had a pretty good wind moving some water around. I found some wind blowing down a bank and decided to fish it. and water was fairly off colored. And I tried to just find out if there were some fish, you know, in the area throwing a soft plastic, to no avail. Okay. So I kept working, made a slight move to a different area, and then switched it up a little bit and started throwing, which I really like to fish jerkbaits in the fall. And I started throwing a Rapala shadow wrap shad, which is really kind of one of my favorite lipped jerkbaits because I love the bait profile of it. And so I started covering some water. Boom. All of a sudden, you know, got my first fish. A really nice fish, actually, about 21, 22 inch fish. And so start kind of picking that apart, caught 2 or 3 more. And then what happened is you can start to see, and this is like it's like 3:30. Now it's about 4 o'clock. And so now that the sun's starting to hit a little bit of a different angle on the horizon, that wind's starting to shut down a little bit. And what I then did, and I have a myriad of different jerk baits, and I have a lot that are in my box. And so that bait started to kind of taper off on a shadow wrap shad. And so what I then did is I switched it up to, it's actually a guy here in Texas. His name's Roland, from CMG Lures. He makes a couple of custom jerk baits, that are slender in profile, but they actually dig a little bit deeper. And so I had a couple custom painted for me. And so I started throwing that one where a shadow wrap shed is a slow riser. And then this one is a super slow riser. So it digs a little bit deeper and it rises a little bit slower. And so what I'm trying to do is basically get that bait a little bit further down the column and have it rise a lot slower and maybe see if the fish posture, if they're going to eat it a little bit better. And so sure enough, caught 2 or 3 on that. And then the wind almost just daggum shut down. There was still a light ripple on the water. So what I did is I kind of matched the conditions. The bite again kind of fizzled on that. So what I then did is I switched over to actually a 17 MR. I don't really throw a whole lot of 17 MRs, but it's been such a good bait for me in past that I'll never not have one in my box. And so I actually have one of those in my box. And what I then did is I started throwing a really, really small profile, again, Miradine, to match the conditions, which are almost now dead calm. The water's kind of starting to clear up a little bit. And sure enough, I was able to kind of keep that bite going by just changing profile. And if you're familiar, obviously, with the 17 MR, it's a twitch bait, and it has a slow descent versus an actual rise. And so these are just being in tune with different profiles of baits, the different fish abilities of those baits, and then obviously using those to, and kind of seeing the fish posture and how they're responding to different things, to then keeping that bite going. So what most people have been like, man, the bite's done. You make a couple of the different modifications and changing some of your techniques and being in tune with what each of those baits provide in terms of capability. Now you can keep that bite kind of going. And so as that bite really kind of started to kind of transcend, it actually started getting better because the sun started hitting the horizon. What I then did is I switched over. I really targeted a big bite. So to this point, actually the biggest I caught up to this point was probably like 23.5. And so I was really looking for something obviously 25 plus. And so I started throwing an old bait, a storm jointed ThunderStick. And so this is like a 6-inch bait jointed on the back end, super old. It's like a 20-year-old bait. This is like one of the first kind of jerkbait, quote unquote jerkbaits that I've fished in my life. And so the idea there is that, okay, this wind is really kind of shut down. I'm starting to see bait kind of popping up on the surface, and I'm starting to see some fish kind of, boiling. You're starting to hear some slurps. And so I know those fish are kind of in that feed mode. I'm starting to see some slicks pop up. And so now might be a great opportunity to fish that really, really high part of the water column and then really trick a big fish that maybe is present that's eating some big, eating some mullet or something that's available. And so I had 3 blowups. I went from catching a fish pretty consistently to then again, when you start targeting those bigger bites, you're looking for that. You're looking for a big bite. And so it's not about quantity, it's about that quality bite. And so boom, first fish I caught was a really, really, really fat fish, close to 25. I would say probably close to 5 pounds. If it wasn't, it's pretty daggum close. It's super fat. I have a picture of that, but And then, oh my gosh, next 2 bites that I had, one of them was just an absolute monster, mister. And I'm like, dadgummit. So what I then did is that was it. That bite kind of fizzled. But what I could see, because there was no wind at all, I mean, it was glass, I could see the fish swirling behind it. And I could see him flash on the bait. And so a storm jointed thunderstick, if you twitch it and kind of give it a little cadence, it's going to go down like 2-3 inches and pop right back up. And so, I mean, they're really feeding in the upper half of the column. But now at this point, I think that bait profile in those conditions was really just overpowering. And so, and they were telling me that, right? They were swiping on it. They were like, I don't quite want to commit. And so then what I did is I'm like, okay, I know I'm getting a response because they're at least interested. I then switched up to a MirrOlure, or a Texas Custom Lures MirrOlure Double D. It's made by MirrOlure, but it's actually sold here in Texas, but they call it a Double D. And so what it does is it's a 27 MR or a Mirrodine XL. And what it does is when you twitch it down, unlike the actual traditional XL sinking, when you twitch it down, it floats back up. So it's a great bait for fishing, let's say 8 inches to the top of the water column, but in a smaller profile. And that's when I caught the biggest fish, was throwing that, because I knew I was getting responses on that big bite bait, or big bait to get a big bite. And then now I was still able to target that big bite, but in a smaller profile, and kind of give them something they can look at a little bit more. And sure enough, man, it happened. So I say all that to describe all that, because regardless of fishery that you're fishing in, being in tune with baits and their capabilities, and understanding and maybe looking at what's going on, or how a fish is hooked, or how they're responding or swirling on a bait, they give you these clues. They give you these indications. It's you having the confidence or understanding, hey, I need to make a change here. Like, I can throw this bait. I missed a giant on this storm jointed thunderstick. I'm just going to keep throwing it and hope another one. Well, it probably wouldn't have panned out, because I knew the conditions were changing at that point. I could see the fish posture something was going on. And so making a slight change, giving them something smaller in profile, it's a gamble. Of course, it's a decision you have to make, but I'm trying to make an educated decision. So regardless of fishery and where you're at, understanding your bait capability and what it provides to you can not only keep a bite going, but it can then take it in targeting a bigger fish, or targeting the best bite in that particular area. So anyway, that was extremely long-winded, but hopefully that gives people some inspiration to just be super in tune with your tackle. Don't fish brands, fish capabilities.
No, I love that.
Yeah.
I still think, though, for the average person, because between you and your dad, you've probably, caught more trout than anyone, any two men living. If you guys, what is your dad's crazy record, by the way, for those that missed the first podcast?
Yeah, he tagged and released 12,000 trout in 4 years.
12,000 trout. Nuts. All right. So for the average person who does not have this crazy fish whisper gift that you guys have, because all that sounds great once you were in a feeding zone, right? You could see the bait, you could see the boils, you knew there were fish out there, and you're waiting, right? Like, you're not in a boat or kayak, correct?
Yeah.
So
no, that's right. But I had made a few changes in terms of area, so I did leave that out. Obviously, going to find some fish,
Let's talk fall specifically, like depth and are certain types of structure or grass. Yeah, sure. Like, what are you looking for?
So, okay, I'll go back, because I have some experience, to some extent, fishing really a couple of different estuaries. So when I lived there at Patrick Air Force Base, since obviously, you guys are out of Florida and having some familiarity there, fishing, in a Banana River and fishing right there in the IRL, I would target a lot of grass. And even this time of year, I have pictures. I caught some really beautiful fish on a Corky Fat Boy in the Banana River, fishing grass, in a pretty shallow area with some, closer drops nearby, but it's not deep by any stretch. But honestly, then I was targeting, fish feeding up on these flats, actually on needlefish. I felt like, but grass I really like, and I can tell you in Louisiana right now, my dad is fishing grass, and I think what's going on in the grass, and if you think about it, kind of makes sense, is that grass. What happens is, especially in the Louisiana estuary, Florida is obviously a little bit less, but what you have is over the course of the summer, it's hot, it's warm, and so grass starts to grow, and you get a little bit more, right? And so what happens is that forage gets in that grass, and it's comfortable. It's got enough cover to survive, right, from predators. And now what happens is as the cold fronts start to come through, you start to see a little bit of thinning of that cover in that grass, and we'll start to see it die off almost completely in some of the bay complexes that we fished, in Louisiana, in the southeast area of Louisiana. And so now it's exposed, and now there's just this huge, that's why fall fishing can be absolutely phenomenal, because there's a ton of bait in the fishery, because of the summertime, obviously everything's spawning. There's just a whole lot there, and the fish are kind of feel what's going on environmentally. And so now they're just going to eat and gorge and do all their things. Right. And so, but grass is, I think, a great contributor to that, because it's housed all that bait, and now it's dying off, and now they're exposed in these areas, and now those fish are just kind of making an easy meal of them. So I really like targeting grass this time of year. I really, really do. Obviously oysters or, any sort of shell or structures, is big too. For, folks fishing, in the Mississippi area where, it's something similar, probably less grass influence, more shell, but definitely points or drops associated with those areas, but not deep, not deep like you would think of as it being cooling off. I think those fish are still, and I've seen it particularly here in Texas, I still fish super shallow in the dead of the winter. And but I know that's not the case across the way, but I think grass would be a really, really great place to start in general for fall fishing.
And when in everyone's term of shallow is different, does that mean a couple feet for you or what?
Yeah. So shallow for me, so as a wade fisherman, pretty much anything waist deep or less is what I would consider shallow. What I would consider skinny would be probably knee deep or less. And I've caught a lot of really big fish in skinny water in the wintertime. So, I mean, don't think just because it's cold, those fish are just immediately going to retreat. I think a lot of your smaller fish will, but those big, hardy, big, you're talking trout, fish of a lifetime. I think those fish, they can withstand some of that. And if you think about it, there's a big misnomer. I talk a lot of, with Cap Mike McBride, and we always hear it, especially here in Texas, is, oh, you got to fish over mud because it has warmth or whatever it is. Actually, to some extent, but really, I think mud or a mud bottom, really, it has the mullet, right? It's warm, but it's because mullet are present. That's why those big fish are there. They could care less what the bottom contour is. As long as there's something to eat, they're going to eat, right? And so I think the same holds true. As long as there's bait present in your area, and just be mindful of kind of what's going on, you can certainly target a big fish and some skinny stuff if even in the wintertime. But
so let's stay on this subject. This is really awesome. In terms of, and for you guys listening, if you haven't joined our Insider Club, what the questions I'm asking are our big focus too. It's not the spot, because spots obviously don't move. Fish are moving all the time, and especially during seasons. And actually, Chris is one of our new honorary Insider members in there, and so I really want to hammer home these trends. And especially, I think it's a struggle for a lot of people that don't own boats, or maybe they do, and they just still love to go wade fishing in the fall because it's a great time to do it. What else, in terms of your pre-trip planning, what else are you looking for in terms of finding good areas, regardless of where you are?
Yeah, I mean, I say deep water nearby, but definitely something with some sort of influence. I like Maine-based shorelines. I don't know. It really depends. I'll go back to Patrick, living there on a banana river. I mean, really, as long as there was contour and there was structure, so there was grass or shell or something close by, I would target that. And so doing pre-trip planning, honestly, there are some areas that I like to fish more than others, and that's more set up in terms of wind and environmental, conditions. But in terms of like water temperature, I definitely want to understand that. And I know we've talked about this ad nauseum, but really, I can't impress enough, man. It goes back to understanding your moon phase and understanding your feeding windows. I know those transpire the bite, but getting onto an area that you can actually fish that's so variant, depending on weather conditions and tide, and in weather condition. I mean, it could be super duper duper cold for a couple of days. Of course, I'm not going to go fish areas that are pretty skinny, but if there's a front that blows through, it gets cold for like a day or two, and all of a sudden it's back in the mid 60s or low 70s here in South Texas. Yeah, I'm probably going to go right back to some areas I was catching them at before the front, And so I say that because understanding, now being part of the Insider Club, there are people obviously from, a myriad of different fisheries. I would encourage them to just have a repertoire of spots that are situationally dependent. So have an area that you can go to. I mean, one of my favorite spots in the wintertime, sorry to like squirrel here, but like one of my favorite spots to go to in Mississippi was when it would get super cold, that water would dump out. I'd have some deep water bayous that I would jig in, 8 to 10 foot of water, and you catch some really, really good fish in there, because what happens is those fish are just basically pulling in there, withstanding the cold for the next week. And then all of a sudden, okay, it's starting to warm back up here in South Mississippi, and now I can go back on some flats and start to feed. So, but understanding that I have to have some of those spots in my repertoire, and also need to have some areas that, hey, if there's a warming trend for a week or, week and a half, and maybe prefrontal or something like that, there's some areas that are skinny that are setting up to be pretty good. Biggest thing is understanding bait, understand your moon phase and your feeding periods, and then go to those spots, check them out, try to establish a pattern, let them tell you kind of what's going on. And so, and that is such a huge question. But pre-trip planning for me is, again, just understanding conditions.
So what about the moon? You mentioned the moon. Yeah. What are you seeing so far with all of the data you have in terms of the best moon phase, if you will?
Yeah, sure. So that's actually a really good question. And so initially last year, of the 59 entries, and I know we talked about it in our previous podcast, of the 59 entries that we had last year, notionally by a large percentage, but plus 10%, the new moon phase was actually much better than the full moon. Now with almost 300 points or 300 plus points in our data set, we're still seeing that same trend, but not by as large a margin as we once saw. But we're still seeing new moon as being good. So we break it out in a plus or minus 3 days of a new and a full moon. So we're really talking about 12 days out of a month. So again, 3 days before the new moon, 3 days after, 3 days before full, and 3 days after. Those 12 days have a higher percentage as the other 18 days of a month, right? Is that right? That's 30 days. Yep. I'm from South Louisiana, so I can't do public math, but we are still seeing a higher percentage of those fish coming around those larger moon phases. But I will say this, though, it's not so high that I'm only going to fish those 12 days a month.
Got it.
So my point is that, yeah, you're increasing the odds by fishing those areas or by those moon phases. But let's face it, if you can't go in those 12 days, you're not just out of luck. Go when you can, because there are still a large amount of fish coming percentage-wise on days not associated with either of those moons. I think actually the best, and I have to go back and verify this, but if I remember right, actually the best, if you break a month into 4 quadrants, if you will, so you're looking at days 1 through 7 8 through, let's say 8 through 14, I think, and then 15 through 22, and then 22 through 30. Mm-hmm. And that's days of the month. It's really the 8 to 15 is really, I think, the best time to actually go. That's been the highest percentage of fish. So that is really post new moon, pre full moon. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, interesting, huh?
Yeah, it is. So, but dude, look, these are all percentages. These are all us kind of geeking out, maybe seeing if there's something associated with it. But I can tell you, a month and a half ago, I went on the worst rated day of the month with my son down at Corpus Christi and stuck a 30-inch fish on a Ned rig in a spot that traditionally doesn't have big fish ever on it, right? So it's the old adage, right? You got to go to know. And so I would obviously encourage you, but if you're really super interested in trying to target a big fish and really do the study and really understand the science and physics behind it, it doesn't hurt to kind of start to understand some of the percentages and how fish relate to moon phase and feeding periods. Feeding periods is a whole other thing to some extent, because on those days rated high, or on those days that are have better correlation with a better bite, so let's use the 2 days before a new moon is probably one of the better times of the month. Then you really start to go, okay, what is my best spot, or what are some spots that I know through my own experience that maybe has potential for a big fish? And then now I go and look at the actual feeding periods of a major and a minor and go, okay, I'm really going to target this high potential area during this high potential time, because we are seeing a little bit of a correlation there with regards to those big fish feeding in those feeding periods. So that's something I think we're going to try to get after a little bit more this year, is understanding kind of the time of catch data more with every capture. But the little bit that people have shared with us, we are seeing a pretty tight correlation. And I can tell you through my own fish that I registered last year, yeah, there was definitely a correlation with a major or minor. Mm. So it's not, they just feed all throughout the day. No, if you're really going to target a big bite, definitely try to be in your A spot or B spot during these majors or minors, because, from a percentage value, yeah, you've definitely increased that.
Awesome, dude. So what you mentioned earlier, post front, do you like the right after a front, right before it? Have you seen any kind of trends there?
No, I personally prefer fishing pre-front. I think everybody would tell you that. The reason I went post-front was because it was more so moon related than anything. Okay. I really don't like fishing post-front at all. Now in Louisiana, we would like fishing post-front after, like 2 days after, because what happens is it blows some water out, but then it'll start to come back in. It'll come back in clean. But then what you have is some tidal influence. Here, you just don't have the tidal influence. And so if you're a couple days post-front, or let's say you're a day post-front, and you have a pretty or not so good moon phase, and that high pressure settles and that wind just shuts down, you don't have anything to move that water around. And now the bite's just dead because the pressure's high. And so really you're kind of stacking the odds in the opposite direction of just putting them all against you, as opposed to, hey, pre-front, okay, that might trigger a bite. Okay, even if it's not necessarily associated with moon phase, just the simple pre-front, or simply fishing pre-front with a pressure drop, that could trigger a bite as well. So I personally like to fish pre-front. Like I said, today is definitely pre-front. We have something coming through tonight, but misty, super gray skies, kind of really just crummy conditions. I absolutely love it. I throw on the waders, I throw on my rain jacket, and I just head down and grind. It'll be blowing sideways, kind of spitting rain in your face. That's when I really love it, man. That's when I absolutely love fishing. It's just, I love those conditions. They're adverse, and I think adverse conditions in general with regards to trophy trout give you an upper edge. Yeah,
it's funny just looking through your Instagram feed, and I've been following you for quite some time. I'd say the majority of those really big ones, the 27 and above, seem to be like people have rain jackets on. You could tell or at least windbreakers, and you could tell it's windy, and you could tell it's not like perfect slick calm behind them. It's usually it's kind of funny how it's usually kind of crummy outside. So that's interesting.
Yes, sir. Yeah, Matt Chipperfield, he's right there in Northeast Florida.
Yep.
Captain Matt Chipperfield, he actually sent us a video, beautiful citation that him and his guest caught. And it's a slow-mo of him raising a fish out of the water, and you can see it actually raining sideways on him. It's pretty awesome. And that's what we live for. There's nothing better than a great corky bite and just absolutely abysmal, low 50s conditions, rain spitting sideways, wind blowing. When they thump it, man, you just know that that's the one. So anyway.
I love it. So any other trends that you've seen for the fall, early winter off the top of your head? Anything else for people to be thinking about?
Let me think about that for a sec. Not really. I think, well, I'll leave it with this, is that fall, October through December, really what we found is that of all the other times of the year, regardless of your technique, and I mean top water, jerkbaits, soft plastics, fat boys, slow sinks like, XLs or Uzuris or something like that, like really that's the time to fish them. So if you're looking to develop confidence or put something else in your repertoire, fall is the time. We found the most consistency across the varying techniques. The most consistency takes place in the fall. There are almost as many fish registered in a soft plastic as there are in a top water, and as much as there are in like a slow sink or a suspend style bait. So my point there is that go out there, open the tackle box, and then go, right? Fish it. Fish what you have confidence in. Have the confidence to throw something different, whether you fish lip jerk baits or not. If that's something you want to add to your repertoire, fall is definitely a time for that. And I'm not just telling you that. The data trends from a citation fish and above will tell you that as well, as that anglers are throwing different things and fish are responding. So open the tackle box, develop some confidence, because the result and the value of that is when the time does get tough, now you have some confidence to pull back to of having caught some fish on something that might now apply in the winter time, i.e. a corky fat boy. We've always heard that, man, fat boys are really hard lure to learn how to fish. They are, but there's no better time to test drive one in the fall, because if you can start to develop some confidence on fish feeding and then get some bites, I can tell you, and statistics will tell you as well, is that those big fish will eat a big profile plastic in the wintertime. And so now you're throwing what the fish want. You've already have confidence in it, and now you've added it to your arsenal, and now you've just, in essence, become a little bit better angler, right? So
one other question, because I've heard varying answers to this, because I feel like if I find, let's just say it is late fall, winter, and it's nasty kind of cold fronts, it usually seems to be a lot of the smaller trout, the little schools are all together and they kind of hit anything. Like you don't really have to overthink it if you can find them. But I feel like these larger, I mean, especially you get a 30-inch trout, he's there for a reason. He's seen a lot of things come across his face or her face. And are you finding that if you find a bunch of the little schoolies, a bunch of the small ones, that you're finding the big ones, or are they kind of independent of each other?
Yeah. In the summertime, they're independent of each other. Okay. I personally believe they're independent of each other. In the wintertime, like in the harsh, I'd say, let's say November through February, March, when it gets cold and gets downright nasty and you start to kind of develop that bite, and all of a sudden you catch a little dink or something, don't move. And the reason I say that is because that dink trout is your bait. That's the food chain. Mm-hmm. Those big fish will absolutely 100% eat a dink trout. And so there's been way too many occasions, not only by myself, but from people I talk to and the folks I'm interviewing on the podcast and people that I call friend here that have been fishing this coast for an absolutely long time and have a ton of fish, obviously big fish, but man, you will catch, I've caught an 8-inch trout on a corky fat boy, and the next couple casts I'll catch one that's 28. And it's not because they're kind of swimming together. I think those dink trout, those big fish are eyeing those dink trout. They're going to eat them just as fast as they'll eat a mullet or a pinfish or, pogie or whatever else, right? It gets harsh, right? In the wintertime, you got to do what you got to survive. And obviously trout are cannibalistic. And so that's not to say that they're not in the food chain. Now, in the summertime, it's a different story. There's just so much more bait available. There's shrimp. There's obviously just a lot of different things. And so I don't necessarily think they're kind of following these schools of dink trout. I just think that in the wintertime, they're doing what they got to do to survive, and they're savages. I mean, again, Matt Chipperfield, that was probably my most favorite post this year, was a trout that he caught on a topwater bait that had a 14-inch redfish tail sticking out of its throat. The trout itself was, oh my God. So the fact that fish ate a 14-inch redfish and then ate a topwater plug, these things are savages. So yeah, to answer your question, yeah, you catch dink trout. I'd give it a little bit of time, because you'd be surprised. There could be some big fish swimming around with those rascals.
Cool. That's awesome, brother. Well, I know you have to get back to work here and hopefully catch some fish here with your Misty Grace guys. So everyone, please go make sure to check out Speckled Truth on Instagram, all the social media places, but definitely check out the podcast. He's doing a really amazing job. And the first one with your dad was special for a lot of reasons. And the fact that, I mean, the dude's caught thousands and thousands and thousands of trout and just a wealth of knowledge. And we'll have to get him on this show at some point as well. But man, Chris, I thank you all. And then finally, make sure you guys join the Insider Club if you haven't already. Chris is in there making posts and doing reports and sharing some love with everyone in there. And we just officially hit 10,000 members in the Insider Club. Gracious. So yeah, we're super pumped about that. That's 4 years in the making.
Congrats, Joe. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, of us, sharing a lot of our best tips and trends. And now that network is, man, pretty doggone powerful from really Texas to Virginia. It's not going to help you if you're in California so much, but if you fish inshore fishing from Texas, obviously in Florida where we are, up the coast to that Virginia area, we'd love to see you in there. And but please go subscribe to Speckled Truth on the iTunes and Stitcher and the Podbean and all these other crazy places that podcasts are now found on. So
I know.
Dude, yeah, we'll have to. We need to get out there at some point this late fall and fish with you. That'd be a blast.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, my friend. Well,
absolutely.
Guys, yes, thank you all so much, Chris. Thank you for the time. I know you're a busy dude right now.
All right, Joe.
And we'll be chatting soon.
Thanks again, brother. Take care.
See you guys.
'Cause fishing, it's in my